just because we're live streaming, if you could just raise your hands and we'll come around with a mic. And I don't know if you want to, maybe people can start thinking about questions, and if you wanted to maybe respond to Rory's very insightful thoughts. What's that? Where is our other mic? There it is. Nice. Questions?
I could address the
Yeah.
question camp a little bit more. I mean, having thought a little bit more about it, I think how we police these things is an important question. I mean, and that word police isn't my favorite word. I mean, how we monitor. Okay, sorry. I think, how bad actors are dealt with is something that on a mesh network, or if you're connected directly to the backbone, or if you're using Tor, I mean, there's scenarios where traditional ways of encouraging better behavior don't work, and it's a challenge. I don't know, and I think the scenario you were describing with kids posting things that are either hurtful or could get them in trouble, or for whatever reason maybe they shouldn't be posting, like that's something that we're not dealing with well, and I'm not sure what should be done, but it's a problem that nobody, I think, is addressing. I don't know, not well as far as I know. Twitter's not dealing with it well. Facebook's not dealing with it well.
Hi, thanks for a great panel. I just wanted to flip that last presentation. Anyway, back to Brian's presentation, and particularly the very prominent presence of Google as a tier one, and how you just think about that issue. I mean, particularly, I've been struck by the discourse around the issue of net neutrality, and how once big content was on the side of big cable, we sort of ignored the ways in which Google is not neutral in all every layer of the stack. So just kind of really just throwing back those last provocations to you.
That is an infrastructure thing, the Google network. It is problematic. I'm not a security guy, and I can't really say what we should do about that. But I'm hoping they buy the infrastructure from their website. It's on. Does anyone, you know what I mean? Google being the tier one.
Yeah, I think it's a super good point, and I think it's really important to kind of think a little bit harder than we usually do about net neutrality, especially when we start seeing like the physical networks of these huge content providers acting as peers with what are traditionally the pipes, and the argument, the traditional, say the basic, like straightforward net neutrality argument is that there should be some fairness, that the pipes should be distinguished from the content, right? But some of the biggest tier one networks now are specifically content providers. So, and then that's like you see that come up problematically when you have things like this whole like SOPA protest with all this Silicon Valley attitude of like all these protest websites, which like Google and others were like participating, and it's just like it just kind of starts to feel a little icky, like there's this kind of like cartel. I mean, they want neutrality, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's almost analogous to the kind of like, what is it called, the supposed firewall that used to exist between the buy side and the sell side of like economics, right? We're just like, just trust us. We're going to keep the research people separate from like the investors or whatever. It's like there's no reason to assume that Google would actually internally.
Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's just something to try to think more closely about. Well, I don't know that we should expect Google, they're an ad company, to like hold up our virtues of net neutrality. I mean, I think they do, and they should be, to their benefit. I think they have been proponent of net neutrality, as far as I know. I'm more worried about like the FCC.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to
I
do,
don't think the FCC believes in net neutrality.
what I'm trying to do is
So I had a question for everyone, but in particular for Day. Part of what I loved, this was a great panel, thank you so much for it. Part of what I loved about it was that it really got us into the like hardware nitty gritty of like renting rooftop space and trying to form a collective and installing solar panels and so on. And I wanted to see if we could bring the human dimension of getting these things running in even more. And I would love to hear everyone's thoughts about those sort of human aspects of keeping these systems going. But in particular today, I was curious if you could talk about how things get selected for the front page and kind of how the data stewards are sort of encountered and brought in. Like how are people kind of like integrated into the Red Hook system?
Yeah, so it's the digital stewards. They are actually, what we do is, my organization is primarily a youth development organization. So there's always recruitment happening, right? To bring in young people who might be interested in certain areas. So for the digital stewards, we're looking for young people who are interested in building these career skills and taking them, hopefully using them within the neighborhood and then eventually maybe moving out. But we do like to encourage people to use them right there in their home base. So that's how we're getting them in. But in terms of the marketing, right, and our splash page, we are very serious about incorporating like the focus on content. Because anytime you have, and this is why I guess these companies are venturing into marketing, anytime you have people coming to your platform for something, you want to give them what they came for, right, in some cases. And for us, I am that person right now who manages the information that is up on the front page, who chooses it, but it really is based on what I know about this community of people, right? So I know people in my neighborhood because of surveys we've done, they want jobs, okay? So I'm gonna make sure when they come to our platform, this is something that's reflected there. I know people in my community, they like to see what's going on, what events are coming up, and if we're having a harvest festival, they want to know about it. And if we're having a community meeting where we can get together and curse out NYCHA because they're not making repairs, people want to know about that because they want to come and curse out NYCHA. So I give them what they want. And anyone who is going to come in and do this work, like we're at RHI, we're currently working on hiring a communications assistant, and there will always be someone that is going to manage that information, and it will be someone from the community who knows, what people want and what they're interested in. Because I feel like, especially someone who grew up in a place that's considered poor, what you have oftentimes is people who come in with a service and they dump it in your lap and they tell you, this is what you want, right? No, it's not. That's why you have to take time out to get to know your community, and find out what it is they want so you can provide it.
I have a question. I enjoyed everybody's presentation and really have to believe. I was concerned about, I think it's great that you want to provide the students there with jobs. I'm just wondering about if you plan to do something as well as getting them sustainable jobs with a decent salary, benefits, and also perhaps training to start their own business as well. Is that in your forecast?
I love that idea of training people in terms of entrepreneurship. Right now, I can't think of a program that focuses directly on that, but in terms of creating not just opportunities for jobs, right, for somebody to come in and make minimum wage, we do create pathways to careers. Like, that's the focus. So when they're coming in, we're not like, okay, we're just going to train you and we're going to send you to some place where we know you won't make a living wage. Networking is good money. Like if you can get someone, bring them in and teach them how to manage a mesh network, they can go on to work at organizations that are doing this. And we've had some young people that, when we had a young man who went and has worked with Google, we've had young men that have gone on to work with networking design companies and things like that. And it really is personal to them, though, because you have some people who are willing to do the work and go forward and move in that vein where they're going to go and get something something that is long-term and sustainable, and then you have some that may not want that and don't know what they want. And I love your idea about training people in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Great panel, and I hope that you all can jump in on this. I guess my first thoughts are the fact that as mesh is becoming popular, that the government will be moving in and try to ban it. So, for instance, you could look at an innocuous situation, like what they did with CDs and linears, and used some arcane technical issues to say it's the powers of destroying, broadcast television. But I think that the greater concern is the way in which the city has sold us out from their franchise perspective. And allowed Time Warner and the predecessor, of course, to act in as a monopoly, essentially, in areas where there isn't any choice. And I don't know what provision a mesh would have. I don't know if it's illegal to do this. So I think this is very important to get this out. I'd be very curious to see, for instance, a case study about these communities. You could point to Chinatown, and I think that's important. Also, the Red Hook example, really about how these things get started, how they are sanctioned or not sanctioned by the powers that be, and whether this might be an alternative for people. Because I think you are going to get to a point where it is going to be communities that are being redlined because of the economic realities and how expensive it is for broadband coverage.
And maybe we could just take one more question and then kind of have a conversation around that question. And if anyone has one more, and then we can wrap up.
I just think it flows well with the gentleman's comment and question about Link NYC's being non-competitive. They are offering free, essentially it's a state-of-the-art mesh network, and the city is fully funding. And the challenge is for groups like Red Hook and others to remain people-centered, cooperative, people-owned, rather than a Google-sponsored public-private partnership. That's the question.
Yeah, you were asking about models, and our inspiration was Wi-Fi in Spain, and specifically Catalonia, which I'm sure that network's being put to heavy use at the moment. And they have 34,000 nodes. It's a huge network. It's the second biggest network there. They previously just had Telefonica, which is a former government monopoly. So that to see big networks is best to look in the rest of the world. It's only starting to happen now in this country. There's big networks in Slovenia and Austria, Germany, and South America. And you're asking about the government making it illegal. It would be really difficult. They have to go to each rooftop and remove the routers. It's really hard to shut down. Like in Cuba, it's illegal, but there's routers everywhere on the rooftops. They have to sneak in the routers in their luggage. They somehow put them.
Thank you guys for that question. One of the things that came to me when you were talking about like Google, how do we avoid these community networks being eventually being put in the hands or transferring into the hands of these big companies? And that's one of the things that Red Wi-Fi and the staff at Red Hook Initiative is consistently thinking about. It's like, okay, we have this community network now, right? We had our 15 nodes, and that's relatively affordable, something we can afford to do with the grant money that we get and the monies that come through the organization. now we have this money that is paying for the expansion, but it doesn't pay for it consistently, right? So after 2 years of being able to provide this free service, how do we avoid having to bring in a Time Warner or a Google or some big company to sponsor us, you know, so that we don't have to pay for it anymore? It's like really bringing it down to this hyper-local level of dealing with our own problems, you know, figuring out a way to pay for this network consistently. And I know that Wi-Fi, there's different, when you do research on these different mesh networks across the world, some of them do cooperative models where, you know, people pay in a little bit at a time and things like that, but of course it's not the same amount that we pay for Wi-Fi now. So it's finding a way to really connect to, I would say, like the knowledge and the commitment of the people in our network, so that we do not have to go that route and have someone sponsor us, you know, or go looking for money, because when you do that, then that's when people come looking for your data, you know? So that's all I can think.
Yeah, thanks for those questions, and also for mentioning CB, which is an example dear to my heart, and definitely connected to, I think, some of the attachments that exist in the sort of mesh network fantasy of just like this totally distributed wireless system that can't be shut down, like Brian was mentioning. But I think there's kind of like two ways that we could think about your question. One is like the route that Brian was alluding to, which will really then push us towards like a lot of contentious politics around electromagnetic spectrum, which is like at this point like quite saturated in terms of like all the different types of devices and the different bandwidths that are being utilized. And already, like, you know, Wi-Fi was originally 2.4 gigahertz, and now it's also expanding to 5 gigahertz. And then this example that I showed of GoTana, like they're trying to occupy some white space that exists in the 900 megahertz band. Like, there's all this really interesting jockeying around like where there's space. And so if we do imagine this kind of like mesh future where this really would become an important like sort of like, I don't know, site of resistance if FCC tried to shut it down or something, there would be these questions around like where can we find spectrum. And another possible way that it could go, to give a third shout out to Wi-Fi again in Catalonia, is that one of the things that they did was, and to borrow, this is a term from Lisa Gittleman, which is the idea of wirefulness. So there was a kind of, you know, we often think of this teleological progression from like wired to wireless, but one of the things that Wi-Fi did was then graduate from their original wireless network to then wire up again, because it was just more efficient and they could just sort of not have to deal with all these contentious wireless issues by just buying really, really cheap fiber optic cable from China and just running it through their community, which I think points to another really interesting aspect of mesh, which is that they're meshed in their community not just at a technical level, but a really elaborate weaving together of different types of institutions. Some of them are quasi-private, quasi-public-private partnerships. So like Telefonica, for example, inherited a lot of formerly public infrastructure with the stipulation that they had to be able to lease it back to community groups if requested. So a lot of the stuff that Wi-Fi did with this fiber was like running it along telephone poles that were formerly Telefonica. And so and also running it through property that was owned by like farmers and people in the community. So like really entangling themselves in the community in these different ways. And I think that's another response to like this idea that like, you know, FCC could shut down certain spectrum or something. Well, there's a lot of different types of people and institutions that are participating in the KP network. So. I'll say one more thing about just scale on these networks. I think the Replic initiative is an interesting like neighborhood scale. What Sidewalk Labs is doing with Link is city scale, and something like Wi-Fi is more like regional scale. And I think at each of these different scales, there's really different politics at play and like different stakeholders and different social dynamics. So I mean, I'm a Google skeptic by default, but I do think, you know, they're negotiating with the city, and if we want to have leverage with whatever they're doing on these Link monoliths, like we need to go through our city council representatives, and you know that's an established political process. And I don't know. I mean, I think the real problem is just more that people don't pay attention to what's going on with them. You know, when houseless people lose their access because people don't like the idea of people using the internet in public, we should ask like why even have it, or but it's invisible to most people. And that invisibility is more of the problem, I think.
Okay. Hey. All right, so we are going to wrap it up now. We have coffee in the back. We're going to take a 15-minute coffee break, and we'll be back around 3:45 to get started again. Let's give a big round of applause. That was awesome, Rory. That was great. You tied it up really nicely.